Not a lot went right on Wednesday night, but the Phoenix Suns did get a win. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, what actually changed from Tuesday to Wednesday, aside from the fact that the Clippers basically punted the game? Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, a writer at Dime Magazine, the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcasts, and I also create written and video content for the Locked On Suns Insider community, which you can sign up for at the link in the show description below. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Wednesday night post-game, maybe catching you Thursday morning. It was a win, but not a lot to celebrate, so I appreciate you being here. If it's your first time finding the show or you haven't done so before, hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you're finding us. We are free and available everywhere, including YouTube. Hit that button, get a new episode in your feed every single Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer. Join thousands of Suns fans listening and watching this show every single day, and get locked onto the Phoenix Suns all season long. Today's show is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed, win or lose. That's $150 straight to your account, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. 124-108 was the final score, and instead of a moment of the game, because frankly, up until the very last moments of that fourth quarter, I don't think there really was one. What I want to do to kick off the show is basically go through what actually was different. Because the Suns very easily could have lost this game. They were down at halftime. They were down after the third quarter. And then they close it out on like a 20-4, 23-4 run, something like that, and end up with a 16-point victory. But no Kawhi Leonard, no James Harden, no Paul George, and not even an Ivica Zubac or a Russell Westbrook. So the best 6 players on the Clippers all out tonight. And what that meant is that it was time for Bones Hyland and Brandon Boston Jr., two gunners, two bucket getters on this Clippers bench, to have all the shots they could possibly want. Even Terrence Mann, I guess, he's one of the best 6 players. He didn't even play in the second half. He basically didn't even play after the first quarter. And that recipe was enough for a while here. But to start out with somewhat of a positive, and we will be plenty negative throughout the rest of the show, look, Devin Booker answered, okay? It took a minute. Suns went down 10-2 to start off this game. Felt like it was getting ugly again, but rather than missing layups and, having Paul George score on him and some of the other things that Book was lackluster at on Tuesday night at home, he turned it around. It was him that responded after that initial 10-2 start and the timeout that Frank Vogel called. Book had double-digit points in the first quarter. He had a big part to play in that final run at the end. I thought his defense, once Frank Vogel put him on Hyland, I wouldn't say it was perfect. I wouldn't say he shut Bones down or anything like that. But what I would say is he gave effort. I thought he fought through screens. He contained drives. He contested. He did what was asked of him to not allow the Clippers, young guys and G Leaguers and this group that was playing tonight to just embarrass this team. So 37 points, 4 assists, just 1 turnover for Book. Better than 50% from the field. Came out chucking from 3, which is always a good sign for him. Tends to happen in that building, which, side note, but maybe relevant. And Book, after the game even, right? He said he wouldn't necessarily say that they responded or bounced back or whatever the wording was from Amanda Pflugrad on the broadcast. But nevertheless, I do think Book is the biggest reason that this team didn't let that initial lead get ugly, put up more of a fight defensively in the middle portion of the game, and then ultimately, helped, as did pretty much everybody involved in that final stretch. The other thing that changed in this game, well, two things rotation-wise. Royce O'Neal started. So Vogel said just a little while ago that it was very unlikely that Grayson Allen would not be in the starting lineup, basically unless something forced their hand in a postseason environment. But last night's game was ugly enough to force their hand in a non-playoff environment. And so Royce O'Neal starts this game. Played pretty well, did his thing. He had a couple of opportunities in one-on-one situations against Bones and against Brandon Boston. Did his thing defensively, at least provided some size and some resistance and everything else. Made his threes for the most part, had some assists. Had his share of mistakes just like everybody, but I feel like Royce acquitted himself well enough that I would think he probably starts on Friday in Sacramento. Last but not least, in terms of what actually changed, we could debate, we could argue, we could whatever about if it was the difference in winning. I wouldn't necessarily say it was. I think the Clippers just ran out of gas and lost this game much more than the Suns went out and won it, but Drew Eubanks got benched. Flat out bench. So Nurkic back in this game. That's 30 minutes, but the backup center minutes went to a combination of Thad Young and Kevin Durant. Thad Young played 13 minutes. The Suns were a +2 in those minutes. He had 2 assists. He had 2 offensive rebounds, 2 steals, but also 2 fouls, and was just hesitant to shoot. It doesn't feel like Thad Young's scoring is going to be in the cards, given that he's not much of an athlete at this point in his career. He's undersized for the position that he plays now, and he seems to be really hesitant to even take shots. But we'll circle back to the Eubanks side of it. Point is, I said on this show, recapping Tuesday night's loss, that the start by Eubanks was, even if the stats didn't tell you that story, the biggest reason that first quarter got so ugly, the lead got so bad for the Suns, and why they ultimately ended up losing that game. So something had to be done. It was done. I don't feel like Thad Young was some huge difference maker, but honestly, Eubanks, the negative that he is often when he's out there, maybe that could have actually swung this, even if Thad, in the positive direction, didn't do all that much to sway things himself. That's what changed. But we'll see what the mentality was like. We'll see how this team discusses it. Booker's comments were an interesting first step. I want to talk over the course of Tuesday into Wednesday and beyond about this team's resolve, their accountability, their temperament in these moments, because it frustrated a lot of people how they responded on Tuesday night, and I want to give my thoughts. We'll do that next. First, today's show brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Do you ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Well, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capability to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue kicks off their group with perfect city drive and great escape rides. Class of exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3 HD touchscreen infotainment system, 12.3 inch. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Armada, which will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Tow bigger, explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Keeping it rolling here. The Suns, after that game on Tuesday, kept things very close to the vest, as did Vogel. They kind of put on a face of, effectively what we saw and heard after that Nuggets series last year. 36 unbothered, or in this case, Book said the energy was chilling, they're ready for tomorrow. Obviously, that particular line I know frustrated some people, and rightly so. It's also pretty goofy looking in hindsight now, given that we have now seen what tomorrow looked like, which was the game we just watched, and they didn't look ready for it. So it was kind of an asinine quote in the first place after such a bad loss, when not only was Booker just asked generally to describe the mood, but it was also a pretty fraught and heavy locker room interview session where Book was pressed directly on fans want to understand why this keeps happening, what's going on with regard to the letdowns against teams that are shorthanded. Very pointed questions, very direct questions. So Book was not taken out of context or caught off guard by any means. He understood the context of that conversation after that type of loss, and he said it anyway. Kevin Durant said we lose as a team. He said, I know fans want to put blame on one person. I know, people want to point fingers and be negative, but I'm not going to take the bait, basically. Frank Vogel said a lot of, we're going to keep it in-house. Everybody agreed, right? That the message post-game was short and to the point. It was, what's understood doesn't need to be said after such a bad situation like being down 53-16 and getting doubled up at halftime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But after this game, I think it's more than fair to call into question what on earth is going on, right? Because those excuses are fine. At the end of the day, do they owe us, media like me, fan like you, do they really owe us a deep-seated explanation? No, I guess not. But at a certain point, something's got to give. People, many of you listening and watching, spend a lot of your time and money on this team. You care deeply about it. You go to work, you make money, you give it back to these guys, right? And at a certain point, all that has to matter. Otherwise, what are we doing here? So when you kind of give off that energy and then you follow it up with a performance like this, it goes deeper than disappointment about seeding or were the trades a mistake or some of the talking points we can get into. I do think it demonstrated a lack of accountability. There is an element, right? Even if it's goofy, even if at the end of the day it feels unnecessary and a little ridiculous to people in sports. What is portrayed publicly matters, right? I mean, we talk about things like identity, history. Phoenix is a Suns town, right? We say things like that. Over the Cardinals, over the D-backs, whatever. This is a basketball city. This team was here first. Fans love high-powered offenses dating back to the whole history of this franchise, right? Like, if we're going to say all of that, then how fans feel, how the team publicly portrays itself, what the message is externally, that all has to matter. And I would say the Suns failed in that department this week with how they came out and played during a key stretch of their season, with how they continued to let down after good wins and big moments, with how they underestimate their opponent and don't play like a serious team in spots like this. And then to come out and sidestep or kind of front about what was going on, it's a bummer. I really you don't need me to sit here and complain to you any more than what you're already feeling. And it is not I say this all the time, right? It's not a bad thing to get to come on here and talk to you guys about the team and get paid for it. I am not complaining, but I was not in the greatest mood to sit down and do this. I don't have on-court things that I haven't said before. I don't have answers that you guys don't have. But part of why we don't have those answers and part of why these problems are the way that they are still and have not been fixed is because of that lack of accountability, lack of somebody at some point this season. Beal came the closest at various moments, but somebody on the court or in front of microphones showing or saying, or ideally both, demonstrating that these situations that we've all seen, that have made us all pull our hair out, are inexcusable and unacceptable to the people involved and not just us sitting on our couches, right? That's what you want to see and hear. And it has not happened often enough. The problems have not been fixed, meaning the behind-the-scenes strategy or mentality has not worked, and we are well beyond giving this team the benefit of the doubt. So it does matter when that benefit of the doubt is gone, a low point of the season arrives in the final home game of the year where your fans came to support you, and you have nothing to say. Business as usual, get away from the media as soon as possible. Don't have anything to say to your fans in those moments. It does matter now, and we will look back on it when the season ends, if it ends the way it's looking like it will, as a huge bummer, a very frustrating mindset from the players and coaches who I know a lot of you have invested a lot in. It does not feel good to hear that, and it does not feel good to watch a performance like this, and it shouldn't be that way. Especially if you can't follow it up with a competitive game against G-Leaguers and bench warmers. Let's loop back onto the court to close things out. What does the Drew Eubanks benching means, and why did the Suns take so many freaking threes? We'll talk about it next. First, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 straight to your account, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. I am looking at NBA odds for Thursday night. We have a big Pelicans-Kings game, which is basically the two teams on either side of the Suns in the bracket. The Kings are 1-point favorites at home, minus 112 money line. What I like is the over-under, which is 218.5. I feel like that game will go over. The Kings don't play a lot of defense. The Pelicans don't often play a ton of defense either. So check that one out and many more at the FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet an automatic win. Get that $150 straight to your account and enjoy. Closing out the show. All right, some quick things to wrap up. Bench mob vibe check. Mentioned it already at the top in terms of what changed in this game. Starting lineup is one thing. You've heard me beat the drum for that for a while, so I think you know that I'm a fan. Just the size, the defensive intensity, the physicality that Royce is going to be able to bring. I think it's going to be worth it in the long run. I think he's earned his place after a solid enough performance tonight. But where I want to focus is Eubanks. So here's the deal, right? The number one thing that I feel like you can say about Thad Young is that he is a more natural backup for Jusuf Nurkic in the context of what Nurkic's highest value is to this team, which to me is his screening and playmaking at the center position. Being able to take a big man out of the paint as a screener and a playmaker and a passer, and playing with a high IQ, executing sets that they want to run, making plays in the short roll, kicking out to shooters in those spots, etc., etc. That is what Nurk is most important for here, and Thad does a lot of those same things. Whereas, as we've talked about plenty this year, Drew Eubanks, the team does not trust him in those spots. He's not a natural playmaker out of those short roll sets. He doesn't convert looks around the basket, which, Nurkic can struggle with too, but Eubanks doesn't even look to score in those situations, despite having the athleticism. But when he also doesn't have the passing, and he's also not an incredibly, consistent screener necessarily, and can't run dribble handoff stuff on the outside, and it just starts to fall apart as to what the value is. Now, that being the case, I've told you before that I understood Vogel's stubbornness with Eubanks, even if it was obvious a lot of the season it wasn't a positive. The reason I understood it is the alternative is equally uncertain. The alternative means you really don't have a backup center. You're playing a forward at center in Thad Young or in Kevin Durant, and you're sort of praying. You were praying in the Eubanks minutes too. I get it. But I think Vogel felt like if they could at least get rebounding and pick and roll defense, literally forget the offense. If they could just get those two things, then it would be worth it. But against Zubats last night, at various points throughout the year, even the defense wasn't there. And I think the offense, just the hindrance that Eubanks was, just became too bad to ignore. And so that all combines to a situation where we are potentially 6 days from a play-in game with this team, or at best, a week and a half from a playoff game, and they were already running a 9-man rotation. Now one of those 9 is a big question mark. It's not a great place to be. Maybe it's just a matter of you had to rip the Band-Aid off and it's about time and figure it out. You got a week, see what the best option is and execute it. But it's not a good thing, even if it's a necessary thing, to lose faith in a rotation player the final week of the regular season. And that seems like what just happened. Last but not least, the Suns won this game by playing like a G League team, playing like a bad young team, like what they basically, the roster they were playing tonight on the Clippers side, which, if it was their real roster, would be a losing team. It's a bunch of young guys and limited players and everything else. The Suns basically followed suit. They matched what the Clippers played like, which is Bones Highland and Brandon Boston combining to take 53 shot attempts, both of them shooting around or below 50% from the field, and combining for 7 turnovers, right? The Suns played like that. They were just chucking threes. You can tell this unit this team does not have reps playing its small ball unit, because the worst habits you can get into playing that way, ask the Celtics of years past, ask a lot of teams, it can just devolve into pass it around the arc and jack a three when you have a little bit of daylight. It worked tonight for the Suns. They made 18 of them. Their best players in particular were able to make their threes. Royce, I guess KD was cold until the end. Royce was a little cold, but Booker and Beal made theirs, and Allen and Gordon made theirs. It's not like it's a complete failure, but that's not gonna work. Eddie Johnson in that first quarter was saying, as the Clippers extended a lead again, the Suns just need to get to the basket. They need to stop settling for jumpers. At some point, unless it's coming in transition or Beal is having one of those nights where he's like a bat out of hell, it's not going to happen. This team doesn't get to the basket at a high level. It's not going to, given the personnel. But it also can't just be threes. Get to the line. Force it. Force the issue in transition. Manufacture those opportunities. If the only time you're going to get layups is by running, well, then run. I understand all that. So it's not fully a hopeless thing. I'm sure Eddie Johnson would have been fine with transition layups, if not half-court layups. But that's the reality of what this team is. Tonight was just an extreme example of it. But as much as we've been saying the Suns need to take more threes all season, I don't think 50 is their magic number. I don't think that's the sweet spot that they're looking for. The Suns as a team tonight had, let's see, how many points in the paint? 42 out of 124. That's about a third. I always kind of use half as a benchmark. It's rare that teams get there, especially in the modern NBA, but that's kind of where I at least use the comparison point. They were not close to that. So weird game in that regard. It's not like the Suns have put up 53s many nights, but it speaks to playing without Eubanks, playing with a little bit of desperation, and honestly, not playing with a lot of organization, which is the thing I kept crediting them for last week when they put together a few nice performances. That feels like it's evaporated, as has Drew Eubanks' role, as has any confidence in this team. Not a great night. Thank you for listening, though. We'll be closing out the week with Steven Perjone, as is the new usual schedule here. So hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. Get that show in your feed on Friday. Potentially a Suns-Kings recap episode Friday night if they have not sapped all the life out of all of us by then. And then, of course, Sunday, the finale. Brandon Duenas, I believe, will be here with us to recap Suns-Wolves from Minnesota. So, enjoy the weekend. Well, enjoy your Thursday first. Another episode before then. End of the season incoming. I'll talk to you soon.